The cabin lights dimmed just enough to signal the start of a long flight, but not so much that passengers couldn't still see each other. Outside, the Atlanta tarmac shimmered under a late afternoon sun, heat rising in visible waves. Inside, the hum of the Boeing 737's engine settled into a steady drone, the kind of sound that lulls some people to sleep and keeps others wide awake with nervous energy. Near the front of the economy cabin, by the emergency exit row, sat a man who looked like he belonged nowhere and everywhere at once. He wasn't flashy. No loud shirt, no oversized headphones, no constant phone scrolling. Just a dark hoodie, worn jeans, and a calm stillness that made him easy to overlook. His name was Darian Voss, though no one on the plane knew that yet. And at his feet, curled neatly on the floor with his head resting between his paws, was a German shepherd with deep brown eyes and a black and tan coat that gleamed even in the dim light. A vest stitched with crisp white letters read, "Service animal, do not pet." Darian had boarded quietly, like he always did. He'd shown his documentation without being asked, nodded politely when the gate agent double-checked Cairo's paperwork, and walked down the aisle without making eye contact. Not out of rudeness, just habit. Years of moving through spaces where being noticed could mean danger had taught him the value of silence. Cairo, for his part, moved like a shadow. He'd been trained in war zones in places where a single bark at the wrong moment could get people killed. Now retired from active duty, he'd been reassigned to a quieter mission, helping Darian navigate the invisible wounds that didn't show up on x-rays. Nightmares, hypervigilance, the kind of anxiety that creeps in when you've seen too much and can't unsee it. Cairo knew the signs before Darian did. A slight tensing of the shoulders, a clipped breath, a flicker in the eyes, and he'd nudge or rest his head on a knee or simply stay close, anchoring his handler back to the present. The flight was only 30 minutes in when the beverage cart rattled down the aisle. Elena Cho, one of the senior flight attendants, pushed it with practiced efficiency. She'd been flying for 12 years, and while she prided herself on professionalism, she'd also grown weary of what she saw as passengers testing boundaries, especially when it came to pets. Emotional support peacocks, she'd once joked bitterly during a crew debrief. Next thing you know, someone's bringing a goat. She wasn't unkind by nature, but fatigue, long hours, and repeated encounters with passengers who treated airline rules like suggestions had worn her patience thin. And when she reached row 14, she saw the dog's tail shift slightly, just a twitch, as the cart passed. It brushed against the metal frame with a soft thud. Without thinking, Elena reached down and swatted the dog's flank, firm, sharp, the way someone might shoo a stray cat off a porch. "Hey, stay still!" she snapped, her voice louder than she intended. The cabin went quiet. A few passengers turned. A child stopped chewing her pretzel. Even the hum of the engine seemed to pause for a beat. Cairo didn't flinch. He didn't growl. He simply lifted his head, ears perked, eyes steady, not on Elena but on Darian. Darian looked up slowly. His face gave nothing away. No anger, no shock, just a quiet intensity that made Elena's stomach drop just a little. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't stand up. He just said, calm and clear, "Don't ever touch my dog again." Elena straightened, cheeks warming. "He moved into the aisle," she said, defensive now. "I have to keep the path clear for safety." "He's a service animal," Darian replied evenly. "He's trained. He wasn't in the aisle, and no one ever touches him without permission." She opened her mouth to argue, then thought better of it. There was something in his tone, not threatening exactly, but final. Like a door closing, she gave a stiff nod and pushed the cart forward, muttering under her breath about people not reading the rules. But the moment stayed with her, not because she felt guilty yet, but because of how still the man had been. Most passengers would have yelled, demanded to speak to the captain, maybe even filmed the whole thing. But this man? He'd spoken 3 sentences and gone back to staring out the window, one hand resting gently on Cairo's head. Meanwhile, 2 rows behind, Marjorie Finch, a retired high school English teacher with silver-streaked hair and a soft spot for underdogs, had seen the whole thing. She'd been sipping her ginger ale when it happened, and her first instinct was to say something, but she'd hesitated. What if she made it worse? What if the man didn't want attention? So she stayed quiet, but her fingers tightened around her phone in her lap. She hadn't recorded it, she wasn't that kind of person, but the image was burned into her mind. The dog's quiet dignity, the man's controlled response, the attendant's sharp hand. Back at his seat, Darian took a slow breath. His pulse had spiked for a second, old instincts kicking in, but Cairo's presence grounded him. He ran his fingers through the thick fur behind the dog's ears, the way he always did when he needed to reset. He wasn't angry. Not really. He'd faced far worse than a rude flight attendant. But it stung, the assumption that because he was quiet, he didn't matter. That because his dog wasn't barking or jumping, he wasn't working. That because he was a black man traveling alone, he must not be important. He thought about his daughter Zuri, waiting for him in San Diego. She'd been having a rough time at school, kids making comments, teachers not stepping in. He'd promised her he'd be home tonight. No delays, no drama. Just him, Cairo, and their usual Friday night ritual, homemade pizza and bad action movies. He wasn't going to let this ruin that. Still, as the plane leveled off at cruising altitude, he pulled out a small notebook from his backpack, not digital, never digital for personal notes, and jotted down the flight number, the time, the attendant's name tag, Yelena. Not for revenge, for the record, because if this happened to him, it could happen to someone else, someone less able to advocate for themselves. A veteran with severe PTSD, a blind passenger relying on their guide dog, a child with autism whose service animal was their only bridge to the world. He'd file a complaint when they landed. Not loud, not public, just official. Because rules existed for a reason. Hours passed. The meal trays came and went. Cairo stayed perfectly still, only shifting once to rest his chin on Darian's knee. A subtle check-in. Darian smiled faintly and gave his ear a scratch. Outside, the sky turned from blue to purple to black, stars blinking into view like distant lighthouses. Elena avoided row 14 for the rest of the flight. She told herself it was because she was busy, but the truth was she couldn't shake the man's eyes. There was a depth in them that unsettled her, like looking into a well and not knowing how deep it went. She'd worked hundreds of flights, dealt with all kinds of passengers, but this one felt different. She just couldn't say why. When the plane finally began its descent into San Diego, the cabin lights brightened. Passengers stretched, gathered their belongings, checked their phones. Darian zipped his backpack slowly, making sure Cairo's leash was secure. As they stood to deplane, he kept a light hand on the dog's harness, guiding him smoothly into the aisle. Elena stood near the exit, offering her usual, "Thank you for flying with us," with a tight smile. When Darian passed, their eyes met for half a second. He didn't say anything, didn't glare, just nodded slightly, polite, distant, and walked on. She watched him go, Cairo moving in perfect sync beside him, both of them disappearing into the jet bridge without a backward glance. Later, in the crew lounge, one of the junior attendants asked if she was okay. "You've been quiet," the younger woman said. Elena shrugged. Long flight, but as she packed her bag, she replayed the moment in her head. The SWAT, the look, the quiet command, "Don't ever touch my dog again." She told herself it was nothing, just a misunderstanding. But somewhere deep down, a small uneasy voice whispered, "What if you were wrong?" Darian, meanwhile, stepped into the warm California night, Cairo at his side, and breathed in the familiar scent of salt and eucalyptus. Home. He pulled out his phone and texted Zuri. Landed. On my way. No mention of the flight. No hint of tension. Just those 3 words, simple and steady. Like everything was exactly as it should be. And for now, that was enough. The morning sun spilled through the kitchen blinds in soft golden stripes, catching dust motes dancing in the air. Darian stood at the counter pouring coffee into a chipped blue mug, the one Zuri had made him in middle school pottery class. Cairo lay nearby, muzzle resting on his paws, ears twitching at the sound of cereal being poured into a bowl. It was a quiet scene, the kind that felt fragile after years spent in places where silence usually meant danger. Zuri shuffled in, still in her pajamas, hair in a messy bun. She looked tired. Not the "I stayed up too late" kind of tired, but the kind that sits behind the eyes, heavy and quiet. She gave Cairo a half-hearted scratch behind the ears before sliding into a chair. "You okay?" Darian asked, not looking up as he stirred sugar into his coffee. "Yeah," she said too quickly. Then after a pause, "Just school stuff," he nodded. He didn't push. He knew better. Pushing never worked with her. She'd talk when she was ready, just like he had years ago when words felt like shards of glass in his throat. After breakfast, while Zuri got ready for school, Darian sat at the small desk in the living room and opened his laptop. He logged into the airline's customer service portal, typed in the flight number, and began filling out the incident report. He kept it factual. Time, location, description of what happened, emphasis on the unauthorized physical contact with a certified service animal. He attached a copy of Cairo's documentation and his own VA verification letter. No anger, no drama, just clarity. He hit submit and closed the laptop. Done. He didn't expect much. Airlines got hundreds of complaints a day. Most vanished into a digital void, answered weeks later with a generic apology and maybe a travel voucher. That was fine. He hadn't done it for compensation. He'd done it because someone needed to say, "This isn't okay." Not just for him, but for the next veteran, the next person whose lifeline came on 4 legs and a quiet presence. Later that afternoon, while walking Cairo along the beach path near their neighborhood, Darian's phone buzzed. It was a message from an old contact, someone he hadn't heard from in years. Just 2 lines. Heard about the flight. Be careful. Your name's starting to float. Darian stopped walking. Cairo looked up at him, sensing the shift. He typed back, "What do you mean?" The reply came fast. "Somebody posted a blurry photo from the plane. Said you were that scary guy with the military dog. Online sleuths are digging. You know how it goes." Darian exhaled slowly. He'd left active duty over 5 years ago. Officially, he was retired. Unofficially, he still consulted on rare occasions. Training, strategy, the occasional high-stakes extraction, but always under layers of cover. He'd worked hard to build a normal life here, away from headlines and hero worship. He wasn't a symbol. He was just a dad trying to get his daughter through high school without her feeling like she had to carry the weight of his past. Now, that wall might be cracking. Back at home, he checked a few secure forums he still monitored. Nothing concrete, just whispers, speculation, a grainy screenshot of a man in a hoodie with a German shepherd. But it was enough to make his skin prickle. In his line of work, anonymity wasn't a luxury, it was armor. That evening, Zuri came home quieter than usual. She dropped her backpack by the door and went straight to her room without saying a word. Darian waited 10 minutes, then knocked softly. "Hey," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "You want to talk about it?" She was sitting on her bed, knees pulled to her chest. After a long pause, she whispered, "They called me Army Brat again. Said you're probably some scary killer or something. Like, does your dad sleep with a gun under his pillow?" Her voice cracked. "I told them to shut up, but they just laughed." Darian's chest tightened. He sat beside her, not too close. "You don't have to defend me," he said gently. "And you don't have to be ashamed of me either. I did what I had to do so people like you, kids like you, could grow up safe. That's all." She looked at him, eyes glistening. "But what if they're right? What if you are scary?" He smiled faintly. "I'm human, Zuri. I make pancakes that burn sometimes. I forget to take out the trash. I cry at dog commercials. Scary people don't do that." She let out a small laugh, wiping her eyes. "You cried at that commercial with the old man and the golden retriever?" "Guilty," he said, nudging her shoulder. "Point is, people fear what they don't understand, and that's not your burden to fix." Later that night, after Zuri was asleep, Darian sat on the back porch with Cairo beside him. The ocean whispered in the distance. He scrolled through his email and found it. A response from the airline. Polite, vague. "We regret any inconvenience. We take all concerns seriously. As a gesture of goodwill, we've issued a $200 travel voucher. No mention of staff retraining. No acknowledgement that hitting a service animal was a federal violation. Just a coupon and a digital pat on the head." He deleted the email. Meanwhile, across town, Marjorie Finch sat at her kitchen table with her grandson Leo, a journalism student with a mop of curly hair and a passion for truth in everyday stories. She'd finally told him about the flight. "I didn't record it," she said, stirring her tea. "But I can't stop thinking about that man. So calm, and that dog so well behaved. And she just hit him." Leo leaned forward. "Do you remember what the attendant looked like?" "Name tag," said Alina. Mid-30s, sharp eyes looked stressed. He nodded slowly. "If this went viral, it could spark a real conversation. about service animals, about how we treat people who don't fit our expectations. Marjorie hesitated. But what if it hurts him? What if people start digging into his life? That's the risk, Leo admitted. But sometimes silence protects the wrong people. After a long silence, Marjorie sighed. I'll think about it. 2 days later, she made her decision. She didn't have video, but she wrote a detailed account, factual, respectful, focused on the dog and the man's quiet dignity. She posted it on a community forum with the title, Flight Attendant Struck a Service Dog. The passenger said nothing, but you should see what happens next. She didn't tag anyone, didn't name the airline, just told what she saw. Within hours, someone found the flight number from her description. Another user cross-referenced crew schedules. Then came the blurry photo, taken by another passenger who'd snapped a picture of the intense guy with the dog as a joke. It wasn't clear, but it was enough. Online, the story began to grow legs. Comments poured in. That's not just a service dog, that's a retired MWD, military working dog. My cousin served with a handler like that. Those dogs save lives. Why do people assume quiet black men are harmless? Or worse, threatening? Then a breakthrough. A veteran blogger recognized Darian from a declassified photo in a Department of Defense feature about canine teams in special operations. The caption had been vague, Operator V 2014, but the eyes, the jawline, it was enough for those who knew. Suddenly, the narrative shifted. This wasn't just about a dog being hit. It was about a decorated soldier, a man who'd operated in the shadows so others could live in the light, being disrespected in plain sight. News outlets started calling. Social media exploded. Hashtags trended. Respect the vest. Cairo deserves better. Who eyes Viper? Because somewhere in the military forums, someone had whispered the name he'd been known by in the field. Viper. Not for cruelty, but for precision. For moving unseen. For striking only when necessary. Back in Coronado, Darian's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Unknown numbers. Reporter requests. Veterans sending messages of support. One read, "You protected us. Now let us protect your peace." He turned off his phone. Zuri noticed the change. "Is it about the flight?" she asked at dinner. "A little," he admitted. "But it's going to be okay." She studied him. "Are you famous now?" He laughed softly. "Not famous, just seen." That night he sat with Cairo in the backyard again. The dog rested his head on Darian's knee, as if sensing the storm brewing beyond their quiet street. Darian scratched behind his ears, remembering the first time they'd met, in a dusty compound overseas. Cairo just a year old, all energy and focus. They'd saved each other more times than he could count. Now the world was knocking on their door, not with bullets or orders, but with cameras and questions. He didn't want the spotlight. Never had. But if this moment could be used to protect others, to make sure no veteran service dog was ever swatted like a nuisance, then maybe it was worth stepping into the light, just for a little while. He looked up at the stars, the same ones he'd watched from desert outposts and jungle clearings, same sky, different fight. And for the first time in years, he felt not fear but purpose, not as a soldier, but as a father, a handler, a man who believed that kindness and strength could exist in the same breath. Tomorrow, he'd call the airline again, not for himself, for everyone who came after. The video didn't start with fanfare. It wasn't shot in high definition or set to dramatic music. It was just Marjorie Finch's words, typed carefully, thoughtfully, posted on a quiet corner of the internet where people still talked about decency like it mattered. But within 24 hours it had been shared over 40,000 times. Then 100,000. Then 500,000. People weren't just angry about a dog being hit. They were angry about the assumption behind it, that a quiet black man with a well-behaved dog must be someone who wouldn't or couldn't push back. That his calmness was weakness. That his presence was an inconvenience. Screenshots of the blurry airplane photo spread like wildfire. Someone enhanced the image just enough to make out the service vest, the posture, the way the man's hand rested protectively on the dog's back. Online forums lit up with speculation, then confirmation. A retired Air Force K-9 handler posted, "That's not just any service dog. That's a full-grown German Shepherd with military posture. Look at his ears, alert but relaxed. That's training you don't get from a weekend course." Then came the breakthrough. A military history blogger, digging through old Department of Defense newsletters, found a 2015 feature on elite canine teams. Buried in the text was a reference to Operator V, known for precision, restraint, and unwavering loyalty to his partner, Cairo. The accompanying photo was grainy, taken from behind during a training exercise, but the dog's markings matched. The stance matched. And the nickname Viper, mentioned once in a footnote, began to echo across social media. News outlets picked it up. Not the tabloids, the real ones. The kind that checked sources. The kind that called veterans groups for comment. Headlines shifted from "Passenger's dog slapped on flight" to "Delta Force legend endures public humiliation, airline silent." The airline, which had sent Darian a $200 voucher and a boilerplate apology, now found itself drowning in calls, emails, and trending hashtags. Their social media team scrambled to post a vague statement. "We are aware of the situation and are conducting a thorough internal review." But it was too little. Too late. People wanted accountability, not PR. Alina Cho didn't see it coming. She'd gone to work the next day like any other, still annoyed about the overreaction from that passenger. But when she walked into the crew lounge, the room went quiet. Her supervisor pulled her aside before her shift even started. "Alina, have you seen your phone today?" She hadn't. She'd left it charging at home, exhausted from the long flight. Now she pulled it out and froze. Dozens of missed calls. Texts from friends. "Are you okay? Did you really hit a service dog?" People are saying he's Delta Force, like actual special ops. Her stomach dropped. She opened Twitter, something she rarely used, and saw her name. Not just mentioned. Attached to outrage, clips of news segments played on loop. Commenters called her reckless, ignorant, even cruel. Some went further, threatening, vile, but most just asked, "How could you not know?" She sat down hard on the bench, her hands shaking. It had been one moment. One frustrated swipe. She hadn't meant to hurt the dog. She just wanted it to move. But now that single action had spiraled into something massive, something she couldn't control. She thought about the man's eyes again. That quiet intensity. She'd mistaken it for passivity. But now she wondered, what if it wasn't passivity at all? What if it was discipline? The kind that comes from knowing exactly how much damage you're capable of and choosing not to use it? At home that night, she scrolled through post after post. She read testimonials from veterans. "My service dog is my lifeline. If someone touched him like that, I'd break down." She watched a video of a blind man describing how his guide dog had saved him from stepping into traffic, only to be yelled at by a store clerk who thought he was just a pet. For the first time, Alina felt real shame, not because she was being shamed, but because she finally understood what she'd done. Meanwhile, Darian kept his head down. He turned off notifications, deleted social media apps, took Zuri to school early to avoid reporters who'd started circling their neighborhood. He didn't want fame. He never had, but he also knew silence now would send the wrong message, that this kind of thing was normal, acceptable, forgettable, so he made a call, not to a news station, but to a veterans advocacy group he'd worked with before. He spoke to their director, a former Marine named Tessa, and laid it out plainly. "I don't want interviews," he said. "I don't want my face on TV. But if this moment can be used to fix something, real training, real policy, then let's do that." Tessa listened. Then she said, "People are calling you a hero." "I'm not," he replied. "I'm just a guy who wants his daughter to walk through the world without being ashamed of her dad." Back online, the story kept growing, but in a surprising direction. Instead of just outrage, people started sharing stories of their own. A nurse posted about her PTSD service dog being denied entry to a hospital. A teacher described how her school refused to allow her seizure-alert dog in the classroom. The conversation wasn't just about one flight anymore. It was about how society treats invisible disabilities, how bias shapes who we assume deserves accommodation. Even Zuri noticed the shift. At school, the kids who'd mocked her fell quiet. One girl even apologized. "I didn't know service dogs did all that," she said awkwardly. "My uncle has one now after his accident. He says it's like having a guardian angel." Zuri didn't gloat. She just nodded. But that night she hugged her dad extra tight. "They get it now," she whispered. Darian held her close. "It's not about them getting it," he said. It's about making sure the next person doesn't have to fight so hard to be seen. As the week went on, the airline issued a second statement, this time naming Alina as placed on administrative leave pending investigation. They announced a comprehensive review of service animal policies. But activists weren't satisfied. They wanted mandatory training. They wanted consequences that led to change, not just punishment. Then something unexpected happened. Marjorie Finch reached out, not to the media, but directly to Darian. Through the advocacy group, she sent a message. "I'm sorry I didn't speak up in the moment, but I'm glad I spoke up now. Thank you for your service then and now." Darian wrote back, "Thank you for seeing us." That small exchange, shared, with permission, by the advocacy group, went viral for a different reason. Not anger, not drama. Just two ordinary people choosing empathy over assumption. Alina, watching from the sidelines of her own life, felt something shift inside her. This wasn't just about losing her job. It was about realizing how easily she'd dismissed someone based on how they looked, how they acted, how quietly they carried themselves. She started researching, read about the Americans with Disabilities Act, watched videos of service dogs detecting diabetic lows, interrupting panic attacks, guiding the blind through crowded streets. She learned that hitting a service animal wasn't just rude. It was a federal offense in many states, punishable by fines or even jail time. The weight of it settled on her shoulders like a heavy coat. One evening, she sat at her kitchen table with a blank sheet of paper. She wrote a letter, not for the internet, not for the airline, but for the man on the plane. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't make excuses. She just said, "I was wrong. I didn't understand, I do now. I'm sorry I hurt your dog, and I'm sorry I disrespected you." She didn't know if he'd ever read it, but writing it felt like the first honest thing she'd done in a long time. Across town, Darian stood on his porch again, Cairo beside him, the ocean breeze cool against his skin. The noise of the world was still out there, reporters, headlines, debates, but here in this moment it was quiet. Just the sound of waves, the soft breath of a dog who'd seen war and chosen peace, and the knowledge that sometimes one small act of courage, like speaking up or staying calm, or saying sorry, could ripple farther than anyone expected. He didn't know what came next, but for the first time in days he felt calm again. Not because the storm had passed, but because he knew he wasn't alone in it. Darian didn't answer the phone when the morning talk shows called. He didn't respond to the emails from producers offering exclusive interviews or inspirational segments. He wasn't interested in becoming a symbol, a soundbite, or a story people told to feel better about themselves. What mattered to him was what happened next, not for him, but for the next person boarding a plane with a service dog and a silent burden. So instead of cameras, he asked for a meeting. The airline's CEO, a woman named Helen Reyes who'd taken the job just 6 months earlier, agreed to meet him in person. No press, no PR team. Just two people in a quiet conference room at the airline's regional office, Cairo lying calmly at Darian's feet. Helen didn't offer apologies or vouchers this time. She listened. And when Darian spoke, he didn't talk about himself. He talked about the blind veteran who was turned away from a flight because the gate agent didn't believe his dog was trained. He talked about the teenager with autism, whose service dog was forced to ride in cargo because it looked too big. He talked about how fear and ignorance, not malice, often cause the deepest wounds. Then he made a proposal. "Don't just train your staff on rules," he said. "Train them on people. Bring in veterans. Bring in handlers. Let them see what these dogs actually do. Let them meet Cairo, not as a pet, but as a partner." Helen leaned forward. "You'd be willing to help with that?" "I won't be on camera," he said. "But Cairo will, and I'll help design the program. On one condition. Name it. That the person who hit him, the flight attendant, gets a chance to be part of it. Not as punishment. As learning." Helen blinked. She'd expected anger, demands, lawsuits, not this. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Because shame doesn't change people," Darian said. "Understanding does." Meanwhile, Alina sat in her apartment, blinds drawn, phone silenced. She'd been suspended without pay. Her savings were thin. Friends had drifted away, unsure how to act around her now that she was that flight attendant. But instead of spiraling, she'd done something unexpected. She'd signed up for a weekend workshop hosted by a veterans support nonprofit, one that paired retired military working dogs with former handlers for public education events. She didn't go as a participant. She went as a volunteer, offering to help set up chairs, hand out brochures, do anything that didn't put her in the spotlight. But when she arrived, the organizer, a woman with kind eyes and a prosthetic leg, recognized her from the news. "You're Alina," she said, not unkindly. Alina braced for judgment. Instead, the woman smiled. "Good, we need people like you here." "People like me?" Alina asked, confused. "People who made a mistake," the woman said, "and showed up anyway." That day, Alina watched as a former Marine demonstrated how his service dog could sense an oncoming panic attack before he even realized it himself. She saw a young woman with PTSD light up when her dog nudged her hand during a moment of anxiety. She met Cairo, not in a tense airplane aisle but in a sunlit community center, where he sat patiently as children gently petted him under supervision, his handler explaining how every command, every behavior, had once saved lives in combat zones. And then she saw him, Darian, standing quietly near the back, arms crossed, watching. Their eyes met. He didn't smile, didn't frown, just gave a small nod like he was acknowledging her presence, not her past. After the event, she gathered her courage and walked over. "I wrote you a letter," she said, voice trembling slightly. "I don't know if you got it." "I did," he said. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know." "I didn't understand what I was doing." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Most people don't until they're shown." She swallowed hard. "Is there any way I can make it right?" "Yeah," he said. "Show up, keep learning. And next time you see someone with a service dog, assume they've earned the right to be there." Because they probably have. Back home, Zuri noticed a change in her dad. He was still quiet, still calm. But there was a lightness in his step she hadn't seen in months. She asked him about it over dinner. "I think I finally stopped fighting a war that ended a long time ago," he said, stirring his soup. She smiled. "Does that mean we can have ice cream for dessert?" "Only if Cairo gets a plain dog-safe bite," he said, grinning. At school, Zuri started speaking up, not with anger but with facts. When a classmate joked about fake service animals, she calmly explained the difference between emotional support animals and task-trained service dogs. She even brought in a pamphlet from the advocacy group. The teacher was so impressed she invited Zuri to give a short presentation to the whole class. For the first time, Zuri didn't feel like she had to hide her dad's past. She realized it wasn't something to be ashamed of, it was something to be proud of. Not because of the danger he'd faced, but because of the peace he'd chosen afterward. The airline, meanwhile, moved faster than anyone expected. Within 3 weeks, they announced a new partnership with 3 national veterans organizations to create a mandatory training module for all customer-facing staff. It included videos, live demonstrations, and, most importantly, real handlers sharing their stories. Cairo was featured in the introductory segment, sitting calmly as Darian's voice, unseen, unnamed, explained how his dog helped him sleep through the night. Alina was invited to attend the pilot training session, not as a student, but as someone who'd lived the consequences of getting it wrong. She sat in the back listening as flight attendants asked honest questions. What if the dog barks? How do I know it's real? What do I do if I'm scared of dogs? The answers were practical, compassionate, human. Afterward, Helen Reyes approached her. "We're reinstating you," she said, "with full back pay. And we'd like you to help lead future sessions. Your perspective matters," Alina cried. Not from relief, but from gratitude. She hadn't expected a second chance. She'd only hoped for a way to make things right. Darian heard about it through Tessa, the advocacy director. "She's changed," Tessa said. "Really changed. Good," he replied. "The world needs more people who can admit they were wrong." One evening, as he walked Cairo along the beach, Darian thought about how strange it was, how one moment of tension had unraveled into something that actually helped people. Not through outrage, not through punishment, but through connection. He looked down at Cairo, who trotted beside him, tongue lolling, tail wagging slightly in the ocean breeze. This dog had once cleared rooms in hostile territory. Now he was teaching airline staff how to be kinder. That was the real victory. Back at home, Zuri was on the couch, sketching in her notebook. She'd started drawing again. something she hadn't done since the bullying started. When Darian sat beside her, she showed him a sketch of Cairo wearing a tiny graduation cap. "He's getting an honorary degree from the School of Being Awesome," she said. Darian laughed. "He's earned it." Later that night, as he tucked her in, she asked, "Do you think people will forget about the flight now?" "Maybe," he said. "But I hope they remember what came after. Because in the end, it wasn't about who was right or wrong. It was about what they chose to build from the broken moment. And for the first time in a long time, Darian felt like he was building something that would last. Not with weapons, but with patience, with honesty, and with the quiet courage to say, "I was wrong," or "I need help," or simply, "Let me show you." Outside, the moon rose over the Pacific, silver light rippling on the waves. Inside, a man, his daughter, and a dog who'd seen the worst of the world and still chose to trust it, slept peacefully, knowing they'd done their part to make it a little kinder. The conference hall in downtown San Diego was quiet before the session began. Just the soft hum of air conditioning and the occasional rustle of papers. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, catching dust motes and golden streaks. At the front of the room, a simple podium stood beside a chair, and on the floor next to it a German shepherd lay calmly, ears perked, eyes watchful, but relaxed. His vest read "Service Animal," but those who knew understood he carried a far deeper title. Veteran. Darian Voss stood off to the side. Not in uniform, not in tactical gear, just a plain navy shirt and dark slacks. He wasn't here as a soldier. He wasn't here as a legend. He was here as a man who believed that real change didn't come from headlines, but from honest conversations in rooms like this one. This was the National Aviation Safety and Inclusion Forum, an event usually filled with technical briefings about turbulence protocols and emergency evacuations. But this year, for the first time, there was a session titled "Seeing the Unseen: Service Animals, Invisible Disabilities, and Human Dignity." And Darian had agreed to speak, not because he wanted to, but because someone had to. When the room filled, flight attendants, gate agents, airline executives, even a few FAA representatives, he walked to the podium without fanfare. No introduction, no dramatic music, just him, his voice, and the truth. "I'm not here to talk about combat," he began, his voice steady, quiet but clear. "I'm not here to tell war stories or list medals. I'm here because 3 months ago a flight attendant hit my dog. And in that moment she didn't just swat at an animal, she swatted at trust." He paused. The room was utterly still. "Cairo isn't just trained to sit or stay. He's trained to sense when my heart rate spikes in a crowded space. He's trained to block strangers from getting too close when I'm overwhelmed. He's trained to wake me from nightmares I can't remember having. He's not a convenience. He's a lifeline." He looked out at the audience, not with accusation, but with something softer. Understanding. Most of you will never know what it's like to carry invisible wounds, but you don't need to understand the pain to respect the remedy. And for many of us, that remedy walks on 4 legs. He didn't mention Alina by name, didn't shame her. Instead, he talked about how she'd shown up, how she'd listened, learned, and now helped train others. "That's courage," he said. "Not the kind that fires a weapon, but the kind that admits you were wrong and chooses to do better." After his talk, people didn't rush to take selfies. They waited in line, not for autographs, but to ask questions. A young flight attendant with nervous hands asked, "What should I do if I'm scared of dogs?" Darian smiled gently. "Say so, but don't let fear become disrespect. Ask the handler how to act around their dog. Most will appreciate your honesty." An older gate agent asked, "How do I know if a service dog is real?" "Watch how it behaves," Darian replied. "Real service dogs don't beg, bark, or wander, they work. And if you're unsure, you're allowed to ask 2 questions. Is that a service animal required because of a disability? And what work or task has the dog been trained to perform?" That's it. No paperwork. No interrogation. Cairo stayed by his side the whole time, calm, focused, proof in fur and bone of everything Darian described. Later that afternoon, Darian slipped out quietly, as he always did. No press, no interviews. Just him and Cairo walking back to the parking lot, the California sun warm on their shoulders. That same week, the airline rolled out its new nationwide training program. Every new hire would go through it. Every current employee would refresh it annually. And at the heart of the curriculum was a short film featuring Cairo, showing him guiding Darian through a simulated airport, responding to subtle cues, staying steady in chaos. Darian's voice narrated it, calm and clear. Trust isn't loud. Sometimes it's the quietest thing in the room. Elena, now back on the job, led her first training session for her crew. She didn't hide her story. She shared it honestly, humbly. I thought I was enforcing rules, she told them. But I was enforcing my own assumptions. Don't make my mistake. Her crew listened. And for the first time, they saw service animals not as exceptions to manage, but as partners to respect. Zuri, meanwhile, had started a small club at school called Compassion Crew. It wasn't about activism or protests. It was about noticing. The new kid eating alone, the classmate who flinched at loud noises, the student with a service dog who just wanted to get through the day without stares. They didn't fix everything, but they made space, and sometimes